Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today for the first episode of Entropy Stories. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and give thanks to a few people who have helped shape the person I am. This entire series is dedicated to my mother, who passed away in 2012. She was one of my biggest fans growing up, reading almost everything I wrote and giving me sometimes harsh but needed criticism for it. My only real regret is never having pursued it more and earlier in my life. She would have been excited to see me do this, and I hope wherever she is out there in the great unknown, that she will say to everyone, "That's my son." My best friend is the next person I would like to give thanks to. A man couldn't have asked for a better friend. We've been friends for over 30 years now. I hope you realize how much you mean to me and how much you have helped me over the years. One day I hope to repay you for it all, and we end up in that paradise we often allude to, but never quite put into words. My niece Rachel is the next obvious choice. She has been a great inspiration for the story. I've built a lot of the relationship between Mordecai and Rachel on the relationship with my niece. I hope you enjoy hearing your portrayal in this story. Melissa, this is a birthday gift to you as much as it is to me. My sister Tammy and her family, thank you for all the great many years we shared and the memories I will always look fondly on. Please give child 1, 2, and 3 my love. Finally, to my brother Richard. You are still the biggest asshole I know, but I love you, and one day you might even accept that, and maybe even cherish it. And oh yeah, thank you for giving the world Rachel. One final word to my siblings. I've appreciated a great deal that you have made me a part of your families, even though I never got around to making one of my own. Finally, to everyone else, thank you for being a part of my life. Entropy, end of an era. Kai sat in his chair on his back porch to his house. It was early evening. The heat of the day was beginning to break, and he was enjoying a glass of iced tea and the light breeze coming off the nearby lake. He took a sip of his tea, looking out at the deep red horizon of the setting Ladrana sun. It was an almost perfect moment. There was a noise behind him. He slightly turned to see his wife Alicia coming out of the house with her own glass of iced tea. She wore a beautiful sundress that was yellow and adorned with little flowers on it. She came next to him, leaned in for a kiss. He kissed her cheek. I was wondering where you had gone off to. She smiled at him and took her seat beside him. She reached out and took his hand, and they watched the setting sun together. Had a few things to take care of in town. She paused. Oh, I saw Leland while I was there. He said call him later. Mordecai nodded, took another sip of his tea. Did he say what he wanted? Alicia shook her head. No idea. He said give him a call. There was something he wanted to discuss with you. Mordecai took another sip of his tea, let out an exhale. Probably about that damn irrigation in the northern field. It's been giving us a lot of trouble lately, going off at random times. Last week it flooded the tomatoes. We lost the entire patch. Oh no, she said. I hope there are still some left. I was really looking forward to them. Don't worry, there's plenty left, he said, taking another sip of his tea. There is at least. Suddenly, a thunderous roar swept over them, scaring both of them into silence. Mordecai jumped to his feet, looked around in the sky. He couldn't see any storm clouds in any direction. It was clear horizon to horizon. Then it came again, and several more times after, each getting louder and closer. He couldn't see anything. Alicia pressed against him and wrapped her arms around him. What is it, Kai? She asked softly, her voice filled with more concern than fear. Mordecai shook his head. I don't know. Another loud thunderous boom, and then the sky lit up. All the blood drained from his face as he focused on the bright streaks in the sky. There were 20 of them at least. He realized what they were. They were ships, large ships. He knew of no transports arriving today or even in the next few weeks. Elisa saw them too. She squeezed him hard. Who are they? She asked. Mordecai shook his head. I don't know. The ships began to descend faster and faster through the atmosphere. They looked as if they were preparing to land, but they held their position several kilometers above the surface, their massive engines firing downward, causing a buzzing sound, with an almost electric sound to them. Mordecai had never seen anything like it. They had markings on them, but he couldn't quite make them out, and the ones he could, he didn't recognize. After a few more moments of them hovering, the underside of the ships opened up, and what looked like little black dots started to exit the ship. Oh my, Mordecai said faintly. Alicia squeezed him harder. What are those? She demanded. He was in disbelief. They were troops. This was an invasion. He pulled away from Alicia and grabbed her shoulders and looked directly in her eyes. He did his best to keep his tone level because he knew if he started to panic, she would, and that would do neither one of them any good. We need to get into town now, he said in a very commanding voice to her. She nodded. Yes, 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 she said nervously. He let her go, and then he grabbed her hand, and they entered back into the house together. They entered the house together. Mordecai let Alicia's hand go and started to walk into the living room, leaving her standing there by the porch doors. Do I need to get anything, Kai? She asked. Get a bag, fill it with bottled water and non-perishables, he said as he headed over to the far wall of the living room. She gasped. She knew what was behind that wall. She was in a very surreal moment. You think you will need a weapon? She asked. He didn't say anything to her. Kai, you really think you need a weapon? He stopped a moment before entering his passcode to the safe that was now exposed behind the wall panel. I hope not, he finally said. He entered in his passcode. The door of the safe slid open, revealing 3 old-looking rifles and 3 pistols, much more primitive than the rest of their technology they had. He pulled one of the old-looking rifles from the safe, gave it a quick once-over, and grabbed a magazine, putting it into the rifle, and primed it. He grabbed 2 more magazines and slipped one in each pocket. He did the same with one of the pistols and put it in the back of his waistband of his pants. He looked back over at Alicia, who had frozen in place. She was staring at him. Alicia, he said. He got no response from her. Alicia, he bellowed out at her. This shook her out of her trance, and she replied, Yes? I need you to be with me, honey. Everything is going to be okay, he replied. She nodded. The momentary fear that had gripped her succumbed. She had been there before, thousands of years before, back on Earth, during the resource wars in her home country. She just couldn't believe she was seeing it all over again. Yes, water, food, anything else? She said as she turned and headed towards the kitchen. Flashlights and extra power cells if we have them, he blurted out. As he contemplated taking at least one of the other rifles for her, suddenly the front door to the house blew open and a man entered. Mordecai was quick on the draw and without hesitation unslung the rifle and pointed at the figure entering the house. He yelled out, I am armed. Down on the ground now. Dad, 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 it's me. Aiden, his son said. Mordecai lowered the weapon and gave a sigh of relief. He was short of breath and sweaty. Uncle Leland is coming. He sent me ahead. I ran all the way here. He said to be ready. Right, Mordecai said. He tossed the rifle in his hand to his son, and then he reached in and grabbed 2 more magazines and held them up to his son. His son quickly came over and took them from him and shoved them into his pockets like his father did. Mordecai also pulled another pistol out, loaded it, and handed it to his son, also with 2 clips for it. Like his father, he put them in his pocket and the pistol in the back of his waistband of his jeans. Finally, Mordecai took one of the other rifles, loaded it, and slung it over his shoulder. Leland said he's coming bearing. He motioned to the last rifle and pistol. Aiden nodded. I believe so. All right, go help your mother. Get non-perishables and bottled water, flashlights, and any power cells you can. Take them out of things if you have to, Mordecai said. Aiden nodded. Dad, what's going on? Who are they? Mordecai shook his head. I don't know, Aiden. Now stop wasting time. His son turned and headed towards the kitchen. Mordecai saw Alicia give him a hug and kissed him, and they went about what they were doing. Mordecai left the front room and headed towards the garage. He opened up the door. His truck was in the garage. He started loading ropes and other equipment into the bed. He jumped inside, started her up, and checked his fuel gauge. She was 3/4 full. He pulled it out of the garage and got back out. He saw a dust cloud coming down the road and a green truck causing it. He recognized it as Leland's, but there was also 2 other trucks behind him. He knew both of them. One was Rachel's, his niece, and the other one was another neighbor that lived down by Leland. Mordecai was unsure what his name was, but they were moving fast. Mordecai ran back into the house and hollered out, Hey, let's go. Aiden and Alicia emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 bags each. Alicia passed them both to him. He took them. They were a bit heavy, but that didn't bother him. Alicia stopped for a moment. Anything else? Mordecai shook his head. Then he stopped and said, Unless you want, and then he motioned to the rifle on his back. Alicia quickly shook her head. No, no, no. Let's hope it doesn't get to that. Mordecai nodded. He knew she was uncomfortable with the weapons. Good, he finally said. Get out into the truck. They both left the house together, forgetting to close the door behind them. Aiden had already loaded his bags into the truck and was in the garage grabbing camping equipment. He saw his dad heading towards the bed of the truck. Dad, he said, you think we need any of this? Load it up, Mordecai said. Aiden smiled and headed towards the bed of the truck and began loading up the camping equipment. He shut the bed and began walking to the back passenger door. His mother had already gotten in. He saw his father walking around the side to the driver's seat, but had stopped, waiting for the small caravan as it was now moving a bit slower up the drive. Mordecai stood there, waiting for the first truck to reach him. The passenger window rolled down. It was his brother Leland, who looked 10 years older than normal. You bearing? Asked Mordecai. Leland nodded. Am I following or leading? Follow, Mordecai said. Where to? Leland asked. To town, Mordecai said. You think that is best? Leland asked. Yes, they are dropping 50 to 60 kilometers south of us. We should be able to get there and set up before they reach us, Mordecai said. All right, Kai, Leland said. Mordecai turned and looked at the ships on the horizon once again. There were at least 20 of them, and they all had a steady stream of black dots coming out of them. Mordecai gulped. Had to be at least 100,000 dots at this point. He wasn't sure what they were going to do. The setting sun had caught his attention once more. It was still pretty. It always puzzled him how the world itself went on, no matter what was happening. He hoped this wasn't the last time he'd see that setting sun. It was an almost perfect moment ruined. 20 minutes later, their caravan had reached the township of Rivers Landing. It was one of the oldest towns in all of Ladrana. It was relatively small. The whole 400-kilometer area around it was sparsely populated by design. Less than 10,000 people in total were here. But they were the center of what little government Ladrana had. Mordecai's brother was a founder of the colony, so was Mordecai, but it had been many years since he last exercised any of his powers as a founder, but he feels very soon he will have to. Rivers Landing was in a bit of a panic when they arrived. There was a steady line of vehicles coming in from the countryside. The one law enforcement officer they had in the entire area was being overwhelmed. Leland went to help him. Rachel went with him. Aiden stayed with Mordecai and his mother. What should I do? Alicia asked. There was a lot of tension in her voice. Go to the community center, start helping set up things there. People will need beds, and we might need a triage area, he said. Oh, she said, her voice trembling. This isn't happening. Hey, I need you to stay focused, he demanded of her. Aiden, go with your mother, help her out. Dad, he protested. He was young, only 25 years old. He was just barely old enough to start receiving the longevity treatments. Sometimes Mordecai forgot how young he was. He himself was over 7,000 years old at this point, with lifetimes of experience to draw upon. I want to help you, he said defiantly. Now listen to me, Mordecai fired back. Mom will be okay, Aiden said. You need me. Alicia and Mordecai's eyes locked. She just gave him the look that she always did when he and Aiden butted heads. It said, he's your son. She said nothing, just continued to unload the back of the truck of the supplies they had brought. She picked up one of the bags and started to head towards the community center as Aiden and Mordecai were staring each other down. Finally, Mordecai broke. Fine. Aiden smiled and there was a bit of excitement in his voice. Good. Rachel had returned. She was running. She carried with her a radio. It was a small black box that was completely smooth on the outside of it. It had a touchscreen interface to it. She shoved the radio into his hands. Channel 3. Dad says it's important. Mordecai tapped the screen, switched over to Channel 3. Kai on 3. Over, he said. The radio crackled with Leland's voice. Get your ass to Brandy Street. Grab every able body you can that has a weapon. We spot it moving about 2 kilometers south. It's big. They have vehicles I've never seen before. Over. Fuck, Mordecai whispered under his breath. He thought they would have more time. He looked around at the chaos that was already going on. People running around without direction. No one directed them. He saw hardly anyone with weapons, but he saw more vehicles approaching from the countryside. All right, heading there. Over, he said. He clipped the radio to the neck of his t-shirt. He looked around one more time. Fuck, he said again. He yelled out, Alicia, get everyone inside the community center now. She didn't hesitate. She dropped the bag she was carrying and started yelling at people to follow her. Should I stay? Aiden finally said. No, you two are with me, he said. They began to run down the road away from the truck and the community center. Mordecai's heart was pounding, but it wasn't from the running. He hadn't felt fear like this in a very long time. At the edge of the town on Brandy, they had set up a defensive line the best they could. They had managed to get about 200 people with weapons. Mordecai watched through a pair of binoculars as what looked like about 1,000 troops walked alongside vehicles that seemed to defy gravity. They pushed down trees that were in their way as they moved forward. There were 4 of these vehicles. Mordecai assumed they were some sort of tank. They looked like tanks. He doubted any of the weapons they had here would do anything to them. Most of the weapons they had were replicas of a bygone era, much like the old rifles of Earth, a metal slug driven by an explosive charge. Weapons were not a priority for the colony. There weren't that many large, dangerous indigenous animals here, and the ones they brought with them had been specifically bred and engineered not to harm people. What future modern weapons they had were more for show than effect. There was a guy named Bert, Leland's neighbor he couldn't remember the name of earlier. He had a laser cannon. It was a design Mordecai had never seen before. He wasn't sure if it had been manufactured or this guy had made it in his garage. They had nothing like heavy weapons, just rifles and pistols. There were several ex-military guys with them. They had fought in various wars back on Earth thousands of years ago, but they were the only ones that had any real experience. The wars Mordecai, Leland, and Rachel had fought in were known collectively as the Resource Wars, over 7,000 years ago. And they weren't in the military, just people who got good at defending what they had and their own. The hovering tanks pushed ever closer. The troops following it, once they realized they had set up a defensive line, had fallen back to behind the tanks. The tanks made a horrendous buzzing sound as they moved like flies or gnats. Mordecai wondered if this was a psychological thing. What they could tell, they appeared human. They had run into no sentient alien life in thousands of years of space travel. The most complicated life they had run into was like a deer and some predators on a few of the worlds they had colonized. So he wasn't sure they weren't aliens, or at least he had hoped. If they were aliens, he wasn't sure how they were supposed to communicate with them, to let them know they meant them no harm, that this invasion wasn't necessary, that they could come to a peaceful solution that would benefit them both. But if they were humans, he also doubted their ability to communicate, but for other reasons. About a half-kilometer from the edge of town, the tanks came to a stop. Struts from their sides extended out and planted 4 feet onto the ground. The engine shut off and the buzzing sound stopped. The troops that were with the tanks were all behind them, and eerie silence filled the air. Mordecai raised his rifle and took aim. Most of the rest followed suit. Leland put a hand on his barrel. "Give it a moment," he said. "Maybe they want to talk." Mordecai scoffed. "Huh, if that is all they wanted, they have a funny way of showing it. I say we hit them now and ask questions later." "Fuckhead," Leland whispered. "Always your problem, Kai. Stand down. Trust me." Mordecai lowered his rifle a bit. The others were a bit hesitant at first, but many followed suit. The ones who didn't, Leland shot them a glance and motioned his hands down towards the ground. They eventually lowered them. Leland began to walk towards the tanks. Mordecai grabbed his arm. "What the fuck are you doing, Lee?" He was in disbelief at what he was seeing. "Trust me, Kai," Leland said. Mordecai held on a moment longer, then loosened his grip, and then let go. "Absolutely," Mordecai finally said. Leland shot a warm smile back at his brother and continued to walk forward. He cleared the defensive barrier. The troops and tanks did not react. "Why the fuck did you let him go?" Rachel demanded, coming up behind Mordecai. Rachel was almost as old as Mordecai. She was about 20 years younger, but when you are dealing with 7,000 years, that's hardly anything. She was a child of Leland from his first life. She was a good person. She loved her father and uncle very much and was very protective of both of them. Mordecai reached out and grabbed her before she made it past him. "Trust me, trust him," he finally said. She pulled away from Mordecai forcefully. "Fucking hell, you two are fools some days," she said. She snatched the pair of binoculars he had hooked to his belt, and she turned and watched her father approach the closest of the 4 tanks. He was only a few hundred meters from them. She dropped the binoculars to the ground and raised her own rifle and took aim, but kept her finger off the trigger. Mordecai said nothing to her. He knew it would be pointless. Leland was now standing about 50 feet from the closest tank. The troops behind the tanks had taken up a defensive position, but they had not raised their weapons yet, and the tanks remained more or less inactive. Leland had his hands up in the air. He cleared his throat. "I'm I mean you no harm. I have come to talk, he finally said. He blushed slightly, feeling like a fool for saying that. A few moments had passed, and there was no reaction from the troops or the tanks. He thought to himself maybe their English had diverged enough that they didn't understand. He tried again. Maybe you don't speak my language or are having a hard time understanding. Listen to my tone. I come in peace. He felt a bit foolish again for putting it that way. Still nothing. There was some movement among the troops, but nothing to indicate they were getting ready to attack. If anything, they seemed to be nervous and scared themselves. Leland risked a look back. He saw Mordecai standing firm with a very intensive gaze on him. He also saw Rachel in front of Mordecai with her rifle raised, along with several others. He wasn't sure what to do next, so he tried again. Hello, he said, starting off with the basics. I'm Leland Weber. I am a founder of this world. Behind me is my brother Mordecai and my daughter Rachel. You have caught us off guard. We are not sure of your intentions, but I assure you we don't raise arms against you in hostility, just defense. We mean you no harm. Again, a moment of silence, but then the tank he was standing in front of vented something from its pylons, and it lowered a few meters towards the ground. It was almost touching. A door slid open. Lights came on all around them. A woman appeared wearing a military uniform. She stepped out. She was about 165 centimeters tall, with long red hair pulled back into a tight bun on her head. She slowly looked around at the defensive line, which was bathed in bright white light coming from the tanks, as it was very late twilight. She stopped a few feet away in front of Leland. Order your soldiers to throw down their weapons and return back to their vehicles and go home, she said, in a very demanding voice. Leland stood straight up. He was a good several centimeters taller than her, and he said in his own authoritative voice, I do not recognize your authority. As a founder and a representative of Ladrana, I must insist you disarm and explain yourself. She stood there a moment, biting at the inside of her cheek. Very well, she finally replied. Soldiers, stand down. The troops behind the tank stood and started walking to the sides of the tank. Doors had opened up, and they began loading their equipment, weapons, and armor into the tanks. They wore very basic gray uniforms underneath, with some ribbons and other insignia that Leland assumed was to signify their ranks. After several moments, the troops had disarmed and were now standing in regimented columns. She looked at Leland, a slight smirk on her face. Satisfactory? Leland nodded. Yes. She smacked her lips and put her hands behind her back. Now you. He unclipped his radio on his hip and spoke into it. Kai, stand down. Tell everyone to return to their vehicles and prepare to leave. Like hell, he heard Rachel's voice say, and there were a few other utterances of disagreement, but none came from Mordecai. He finally replied, right, he said. Leland knew the tone well. It was the one that Mordecai used when he didn't agree, but he wasn't going to make a fuss about it, not at the moment. After a few moments, most of the defensive line had disassembled and began heading back towards the community center. Mordecai, Rachel, and Aiden remained. Leland looked back. He felt they had complied, even though several had remained and were still armed. He looked back at the woman before him. Satisfactory? He asked almost sarcastically. She nodded. Very. Leland held out his hand. I'm Leland Weber, founder and representative of this world. She nodded. I know who you are, Mr. Leland Weber. I'm Colonel Lucia Jimenez of One Earth. I'm here as an emissary to welcome you back to mankind. Leland scoffed. One Earth? We haven't heard jack shit in almost 3,000 years from the inner worlds or Earth. You have no authority here, and I ask you kindly to return to your ships and leave. She shook her head. No, Mr. Leland Weber, I cannot do that. I have orders to bring you into the fold, with or without force. I would prefer to do this without resorting to force, as I'm sure you are. And to be quite frank, we've scanned the planet. We've been observing you for a bit. You have no defenses or military to speak of that would offer more than a few hours of trouble for my men and me. Leland stood there expressionless. She was mostly right on that, but he wasn't going to give her any indication that she was right. So you're saying I have no choice? She smiled, but it was a fake smile. Only her mouth made the movement. Her eyes were filled with a fire of disdain. You always have a choice. It's just one is more pleasant than the other. Wouldn't you agree? Leland let out a slow and controlled breath to hide his anger at her and the whole situation. So what's next? She again flashed that fake smile at him, the most exciting thing imaginable. You get welcomed back to join the rest of humanity and be a part of a great new future. With that, Leland turned to look back at Mordecai, Rachel, and Aiden, who had walked the distance to join him. They were still armed. They had heard the whole exchange. Mordecai gave his brother a disappointed look. Leland knew that if Mordecai had been the one left in charge, he would have chosen option B, to fight, no matter the cost. At this moment, Leland wasn't sure if he disagreed with that. All right, he said to her. Again, another flash of that fake smile. Exciting, isn't it? She said, not expecting an answer. My troops will establish a temporary outpost outside of the town, but eventually we will need a permanent establishment. She motioned towards the town. To be continued in part 2. Thank you for everybody for joining me today in this very special video on a very special day. It is my birthday, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video as much as I have enjoyed putting it together for you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below, and I will try to respond to them as soon as I can. Stay tuned for the next video. It should be out shortly, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great day.